This week, we have an absolutely massive game coming up for the Colorado Buffaloes, a game in which they take the number 18th overall ranked team in Kansas State. It's a game that could absolutely change where Colorado kind of stands within college football. If Colorado is able to beat Kansas State, and if they're able to do a good job the same way we saw BYU kind of do, it could potentially get Colorado ranked in the top 25. Colorado started the season off, first game of the season against NDSU. They did a pretty good job. They were able to come out with a win, and then, they did end up losing to Nebraska, but since then, they ended up putting together a couple of really, really nice wins. And I think we're at the point where Colorado clearly looks like a real team that could actually make a push for the college football playoffs. They could potentially win a conference championship this year. But it's going to start right here against Kansas State. Kansas State is 4-1 at this point. They ended up losing to BYU 2 weeks back. That game wasn't close. Kansas State straight up got beat. And I think based off of what BYU kind of did to Kansas State, I think if Colorado takes that same approach, they could also end up winning. And we're going to talk about what they kind of did a little bit later on. But let's just get right into it, man. I really want to get into just kind of talking about this team, kind of talking about what they've shown so far on tape, and just kind of talking about why I think Kansas State is the best team that Colorado has played up to this point. I think they're even better than Nebraska. Specifically because of the fact that Kansas State not only has a really, really good offensive weapon in their quarterback in Avery Johnson, but they also have a good front seven that we'll talk about here in a second. But let's talk about the quarterback a little bit. Avery Johnson's probably one of the best quarterbacks in the country in terms of being able to make plays with his legs. Avery Johnson is different than what we saw with KJ Jefferson just a week ago, or actually 2 weeks ago at this point. They're a little bit different because I think a guy like Jefferson's maybe a little bit stronger, although he runs with the football the same way a guy like Avery Johnson is going to run with the football. It's a little bit different, right? One guy's, I think, a lot stronger. He's a lot more physical. Avery Johnson for Kansas State's a lot more explosive. He's a lot more twitchy. He's a lot more shifty. And I think right away you're going to pretty much see some of those differences right away on tape. One of the interesting things with Avery Johnson is, this guy, if you run the football with him, right, if you put him into a power lead, or if you run some sort of a power keeper towards the outside, this guy will be able to outrun guys. This guy will be shifty, and he'll see the hole. He'll have that vision where he's able to turn to the inside. Right now, this guy has 343 yards on 42 attempts. That averages 8.2 yards per rush. Avery Johnson's a legit threat on the ground. He's not a great quarterback, right? He's still young. I think he's in his second year in college. So he's not a great passer at this point. Completes about 60% of his passes. He only has 9 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. But the damage that Kansas State's going to do with Avery Johnson is going to be mostly through the ground. Obviously, he'll keep a defense honest by throwing the football over the top. Kansas State's best weapons are also going to be the running backs. And one of those running backs, I think Colorado Buffalo fans know pretty well. That's going to be Dylan Edwards. And Edwards has been really, really, really good this year for Kansas State. Edwards has gotten the second most carries behind DJ Giddens. Giddens has 84 attempts, 604 yards, 2 touchdowns. Dylan Edwards, 29 attempts, 201 yards. But you guys can see that these two guys actually do a good job in the run game. And Kansas State's offensive line also does a pretty good job being able to open up lanes. I think Kansas State has a really good run game coordinator, and you can see that on tape. Edwards, Giddens, both guys average over about 7.2 yards per attempt. So, right away, Colorado's going to have to be there in the front seven. These guys are going to have to show up, and these are going to have to play the same way we saw them essentially play over the last couple of weeks. Baylor, UCF, I think the way Colorado kind of attacked those teams against the run specifically is exactly what they're going to have to do against Kansas State. But I'd make the argument Kansas State has the best run game among that, right? Offensive line, they might have the best offensive line that we're going to have seen this year so far. I will say this, one thing with Kansas State that they've done a really good job with is kind of revamping that offensive line. Easton Kilty, who is their starting left tackle, actually came from North Dakota State last year. He was with NDSU. In fact, for the last 4 years, he was with NDSU. And he's a very good tackle. And then, of course, he came over to Kansas State, and he's been having a pretty good season as well. He hasn't given up any sacks. He hasn't given up any quarterback hits. The guy's been very, very solid. And then just among the offensive line, the group up front's done a pretty good job for Kansas State. I do think their tackles are better than the interior guys. So for Colorado, that could be a matchup that they could potentially take advantage of. But Kansas State has a good offensive line. They have a good quarterback that can run with the football, and they have two good running backs that can also run the football. This is going to be one of those games where if Colorado cannot stop the run, they are not going to be able to beat this team. This team averages 252 yards per game on the ground. But I will also state one other thing with Kansas State that I've kind of noticed watching their tape. I've watched 2 full games, and then I watched some of the other games as well a little bit. Against Tulane in the second week, or the second game that this team played, they kind of struggled. Like, they barely beat Tulane. Score was 27-34, barely beat Tulane. And the interesting thing with that game was Kansas State was actually on the road, barely beat Tulane. Their second game they were on the road this season was against BYU, and they got blown out. So on the road, Kansas State hasn't actually been that good. And this week against Colorado, they'll also be on the road, right? This will be it'll be in Colorado. It'll be a home game for Colorado. I think Colorado has a legit chance to beat Kansas State. And if you win this game, you're looking at a team that's going to potentially be ranked now in the top 25 with Colorado, right? And the rest of the season, I think it's the toughest game Colorado's going to have, right? I think it's going to be this Kansas State game. And if you're able to beat this team, you'll go into the next couple of seasons 5-1. You know, to me, this will be absolutely perfect. This is exactly where you want to be if you're Coach Prime. This is where you want to be if you're Colorado, right? But I do think this game's not going to be as easy as some people think it probably as I don't think it's going to be as easy as some people think it's going to be, right? I think this game is probably going to be the hardest game of the season, specifically because of the fact that Kansas State has something that I think Colorado hasn't really faced, maybe against Nebraska, but Kansas State has an insane front seven, a front seven that is legit as hell. These guys have 2 linebackers that are really good. They have 2 defensive ends that are really, really good. This defense line is going to come after it. And I think with Colorado, one of the things we got to recognize is, you know, if you're going to come out and empty and you're going to come out with 5 offensive linemen, and you're going to 5-man pass protect, your offensive tackles are going to have to hold up, because if they don't, you're going to be in trouble, right? Toby Asanami, and I'm not sure if I say that wrong, right? And then Brendan Mott are 2 of the defensive ends that are going to play a lot for Kansas State. They have a couple other guys that will also rotate in. Travis Bates has been pretty solid. You get a couple guys that kind of rotate in, but those first 2 guys are the guys that are going to be mainly playing. Mott has 6 sacks on the season already, so he's the guy that you're going to have to really keep an eye on. They have 2 really good linebackers as well, and those are 2 other guys you're going to have to kind of keep an eye on. The leader of that defense, Austin Romaine, very, very solid linebacker. You got Austin Moore, who's also a pretty good linebacker. They have a 3rd linebacker that's kind of underrated a little bit in Rex Van Wine. He's a guy that he's only played 75 snaps, but he's actually flashed multiple times. The game I was watching, I can't remember if it was the BYU game. It might have actually been the most recent game, the Oklahoma State game. In that game specifically, this guy made multiple plays. He was all over it. Tackle for loss here, tackle for loss there. A key 3rd down play, this guy jumps the gap, blows it up. And I'm not sure if he just broke out recently or if he just got healthy recently, but he's a guy to kind of keep an eye on. Number 28 for Kansas State. The guy looked really, really good, man. In fact, I have it on my notes right here, and kind of looking at it, he was probably the best player I watched on the defensive side for them. But he didn't play a lot of snaps, right? When I checked the stats, he's only played 75 snaps. So he's a guy to kind of keep an eye on. Rex Van Wy, he looks pretty solid. Now, with that being stated, I think the Colorado Buffaloes can still obviously beat a team like Kansas State. But it's going to really come down to shutting down Avery Johnson. It's going to come down to shutting down the run game as well. The Colorado front seven is going to have to do their thing, right? If the Colorado front seven is unable to stop the run, they're not going to be able to win this game. More than just stopping the run, you know, there's 2 ways to stop the run, right? Essentially, you can say, hey, our front seven needs to just beat the opponent's offensive line and fullback or tight ends, whoever's kind of blocking. Our front seven just needs to win their one-on-one matchups. That's one way. The other way is to stack the box. And I think this is what Colorado has to do against Kansas State. You got to stack the box. You know, if Kansas State comes out there in 11 personnel, you got to put 8 guys in the box. You got to stack the box. Outside gaps have to be shut down. Keep everything inside. because Avery Johnson's quick and explosive, as is Edwards and Gillings, and these guys are legit, right? Like they can run the football and they can have success. For Colorado to be able to shut that down, stack the box. Not saying that guys like, Wester and guys like BJ Green and, some of these other guys can't come downhill and make some plays. I just think it gives you a better chance to be able to beat a team like Kansas State. You have a quarterback that's kind of inexperienced. You have a quarterback that hasn't proven that he's a legit quarterback at this point. 5 games, he has like 800 passing yards. So, I think that's one of the ways Colorado can ultimately win. You want to stack the box. You want to force them to beat you over the top with their passing game. That too, I think one of the positives that Colorado has going for them is they do have a good secondary. Colorado has a really good secondary with guys like Travis Hunter. Another guy that I obviously really like is DJ McKinney. If you guys have followed this channel, you guys know I've kind of talked about him a couple of times. And even guys like Carter Stoutmeyer have kind of broken out in the absence of Shilo Sanders, which is also some other news that we're getting out, right? So Shilo Sanders is expected to return in this game. So Coach Prime put it out there earlier today that Sanders has been practicing in full. Now he will have he will have a cast on, right, playing this game most likely. But he should be good to go. He should be ready to go at this point. And to me, that's really good news because although Stoutmeyer did a pretty good job, Sanders is still arguably one of the better secondary players for Colorado. And he's a tone setter, right? And I think for, when you're going up against a team like Kansas State, this team's going to want to run the football. They're going to want to play power football. And you got to have guys to match that physicality. You need guys to set the tone. And I think Shilo Sanders could be one of those guys. So again, for me, Colorado has to stop the run by stacking the box. That's my approach for the defensive side. Make Avery Johnson throw the ball over the top. But there's also some things they have to do on the offensive side, and we're going to wrap the video up right there. To me, Shedeur Sanders has to be kept clean, right? Talked about how great that front seven for Kansas State is, and, it's not great. Like, there's potential, right? Because potential is one thing, right? Like, week 0, Florida State has potential. They have all these guys that are these crazy pass rushers, potentially the best defensive line in the country, only to get run over by Georgia Tech, right? And we realize that, yeah, I guess potential isn't a thing we should always kind of buy into. This is not potential. Kansas State is not a defensive line with potential. They're a defensive line with talent. They're a defensive line that's put it out there on tape. So you got to keep Shedeur Sanders clean, and there's multiple ways you can do that. If you're a team that loves to 5-man pass protect the way Colorado does, you can get away from that, and you can potentially put in a running back to chip or a tight end on the other side of that running back to influence that defensive end. So there are ways that you could essentially slow down a pass rush. Now, keeping in mind, if you have a running back to chip, if you have a tight end to influence a pass rush, you're not going to have as many weapons downfield. So if a team's only bringing 4 guys and you're utilizing 2 to kind of chip and influence, you're going to have like 6-7 guys in coverage. So you might not be able to get the ball out quickly. Your concepts may not work right away as well. But I think you're better off utilizing some sort of chip help. Now, if your tackles are able to hold their own, right, if Seton does a good job and you can tell he's able to win that matchup, then let the guy go one-on-one. But the one thing you can't do is, if Seton's struggling, you can't not make that adjustment, right? You can't not give that guy help if he needs it. Which, I think Pat Shurmur's done a pretty good job over the past 2 games. I did think he kind of struggled in weeks 1, 2, and 3 with some of his play calling. I think he had some issues, but he's kind of cleaned it up a little bit, and I think the Colorado offense has definitely looked a lot better. But I think keeping the quarterback clean is going to be a big part of it. I also think another thing you're going to have to do is you got to run the football. And you don't need to have a lot of success running the football, and you don't even have to run the ball like more than 14 times max, right? What you got to do is you got to at least have success, right? You got to have at least 2 or 3 big run plays, right? Because you got to keep Kansas State honest, right? Like, you can't let Kansas State say, hey, on every single play, first down, second down, third down, we're 100% just going to full out pass rush, right? You got to give that pass rush the thought that you might run the football. You got to slow them down however you can, even if that's one of those things where you have to do it mentally, right? By hitting them with the draw or hitting them with some sort of trap play to the inside or whatever it is that you end up calling. You got to hit them with some big explosive run plays with the running backs, not the quarterback. Has to be the running back. And that'll keep that defensive line honest. It'll also allow you to potentially keep the quarterback a little bit cleaner because the pass rush kind of slows down a little bit. Plus, it's just, a positive to get the run game going, obviously. And then lastly, I think Travis Hunter needs to be fed the football. And, I'm not telling you guys that I think only Travis Hunter needs the football, right? Because you want to obviously get guys like Jimmy Horn the ball. Wester had a phenomenal game this past week, right? I think he had that one play that ended up going for a touchdown. There's guys that Colorado has, right? You got Will Shepard. You have a good tight end that you don't really use for some reason. And I'll never understand why in Seville Smalls, but Smalls, I think, is one of those tight ends that has upside, right? But he just doesn't get the targets, in my opinion, that he probably should. But you got guys, right? You got weapons on the offensive side. Get your running backs the football a little bit. But with that, as you're spreading the ball, you got to feed Travis Hunter, and I think that's gonna be a big part of this. And I want to see, a deep shot to Jimmy Horn, maybe on the first play of the game, just to open things up a little bit. But I think Travis Hunter has to be fed. I think he needs 12 to 15 targets this game, and not just like 20, 30-yard targets. Get him the ball in space. Throw him a slant pass, right? Like line him up on one side of the field, throw him a slant pass. Have him run a slant on one play and then have him whip out on the next play, right? Get Travis Hunter the football in space and let this guy make plays. Kansas State has a great front seven, but that doesn't extend into the secondary. That doesn't extend into their corners, right? So to me, those are going to be the keys to win for Colorado, and I think Colorado should be able to get this win. But I don't think it's guaranteed, right? They got to show up. They got to play a clean game of football. Coach Prime has to call a clean game as well, right? We can't do anything questionable. You can't go for it on your side of the field, right? You got to play a clean, conservative game, but you got to be aggressive when you have to be, and you got to be able to have success with the trenches, essentially, right? I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What are your guys' predictions for Colorado? Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.